Good morning, everyone. It's 3 minutes past 10, so I think we should kick off. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is the Care Cost Benchmark Virtual Toolkit demo, and also an opportunity for you to ask any questions that you might have of our panelists who are joining us today. So let me introduce them all in turn. First of all, my name is Tim Reed. I'm the Director of Research and Content at LaingBuisson. My job today is purely just to host everything and just make sure that our two experts on the call have every opportunity to kind of provide their insight and knowledge back to you guys. So first of all, we have William Laing, who is the founder and executive chairman of LaingBuisson, and who is responsible for developing the care cost benchmarks over several iterations now. And also, we're very, very pleased to sort of join us and sort of helping put on this webinar is Fraser Ricketson of Care England and policy manager there, who will also be on hand to answer any questions that you might have. There'll be plenty of time for a kind of Q&A afterwards. So any questions that you do have along the way or which come to you, we do have you should see a Q&A option in the bottom line of your screen. Please do drop any questions that you might have in there as you think of them, or ask us later on. The webinar is being recorded, just for everyone's awareness, and will be available to download afterwards along with the slides. So I think that kind of covers off all of the sort of the groundwork. So we should dive straight into the content. So we'll be first going across to William to introduce. Let me just bring up my screen and I will bring the toolkit up. So everyone, I'm hoping, including yourself, William, should be able to see a PowerPoint slide. You're on mute, William, just to let you know.
Right, so I'm unmuted now, I believe. Well, thank you very much, Tim. And as Tim says, the Care Cost Benchmarks has gone through several iterations. I believe we're on the 13th now. It has a long history. It has changed as the information, as the sources of evidence have changed, but it remains basically fundamentally the same. What I want to do first of all is to just look at something which lies outside the Care Cost Benchmark, just as a way, a bit of background, to look at the recent history of fee inflation for local authority funded care homes for older people. So this is just older people, it's not younger adults at all. And this is the data that we've got from the source of this is the Department of Health and Social Care, which collates information which is provided under the Improved Better Care Fund scheme. It provides it now every year with a first estimate of what fee rates are actually within the year of their currency. So this is pretty new and it's very useful. But there are some rather unexpected findings that come out of it if you look at it. And what we've shown here is the blue and orange solid lines, which represent the rate of inflation of average care home fees paid in England for care homes for older people. And then we have the dotted lines, one of which is CPI, and one of which is the National Living Wage Index. I think there are two things that come out of this. First of all, that essentially inflation is, to a very large extent, driven by national living wage, and not so much by CPI. It's the reverse. You can see that there that the black dotted line, which is CPI, it has its big peak in 2023 as a result of the Ukraine war. But the National Living Wage Index runs a slightly different course, and in fact is politically driven. And you'll see there that in the last 2 years, for 24-25 and 23-24, the then Tory government actually put up national living wage by quite a large amount. And this results in the sort of, when it's worked through, results in the sort of fee inflation we see. But there's something very odd as well in the year 2023 to 24. The providers can cast their minds back to this and just think, does that look sensible? What it's saying is that local authority fee rates for older people went up by over 10%, in fact 13% for residential care and 14% for nursing care. That seems very odd to me, and I'll be very interested in hearing in the chat, perhaps, that comes afterwards, discussion whether that rings true or not. But the fact is that we've double-checked this, that is what the data says from the market sustainability figures that are coming through. Actually, as it happens, the first estimate, which was in the first half of the year, showed rather lower figures, around 10% inflation, which was perhaps more credible. But then in the revision the following year, it went up to 13 to 14%. So that's just something I want to bear in mind when we're talking about the Care Cost Benchmarks model and what it shows. So if we can now go on to the Care Cost Benchmarks model itself, and Tim, if you can bring that up with the...
Just to check, William, you should be able to see the Care Cost Benchmarks tool now, just check that you can.
I can't, no, I'm still seeing the initial slide.
Okay. Right, in which case I'm going to stop share and reshare so that comes through. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, does that work?
So that's there. So if we can go to the green start button, this is simply the start of the thing where it shows you the simple steps to follow. And one of the first will be to choose a particular local authority. So we're going to go ahead in just to illustrate for a particular local authority the sort of information we have. And I believe you've selected Essex, is that right?
That is correct, yeah.
Okay. I can't personally see the details. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my own version of this slide and choose Essex and see what the results are. So bear with me just for a second while I do that. Going to cancel. So if we can move on to one of the orange tabs, which shows the results of the Care Cost Benchmarks tool once you've actually selected a local authority. So we can move to residential 65 plus 2024-25. And then what I want to do is just to look at these headline results in the top-hand box. And what that shows is that the median care home costs were £961 per week. And this is from the data, and I'll show you where we derive this data from. It's all evidence-based. And then we've taken from the latest DHSC collation of local authority fee levels, what the average local authority paid fee rate is for 2024-25, which is provisional at the moment. And that shows £769. So here there's a fee gap of £192. And that's quite high, but it's what we find with most local authorities, that the residential care fee that is being paid is lower than the evidence-based median care home costs. And the whole point of this tool is to enable providers to go to local authorities on the basis of this evidence, and if necessary, to challenge whatever fee levels are being proposed for on the basis of 25-26, on the basis of how it stands in 24 to 25, which is about the latest you can possibly get. So now I'd like to just, if we can turn to the nursing care 65 plus, 24-25, if we can go into that tab. So this is the same local authority, but it's just nursing care rather than residential care. And what you'll see there is the reverse takes place, that there is a negative fee gap of £46 in this case. What we're saying is that on the evidence we have, we believe that the median care home costs are about 1,237, and the average local authority paid fee is 1,283 for 24-25. What I'd also like to draw your attention to, this is really quite important, and it harks back to the original slide I was showing, is the health warning here. Because we believe, in fact, we are pretty certain that some local authorities, not all, but some, have overstated the fee level that they're actually paying. And one of the ways in which this can happen, because it's down to each local authority to work out these figures themselves, is that there is an instruction to not to count NHS FNC when they're working out what their costs are. So the costs that local authorities state them should be net of or before NHS FNC, meaning that we at our end, when we're looking at the total fee received, add on NHS FNC. So that is what we've done in the case of Essex, and we've arrived at a figure of 1237. What I think has probably happened in this case, although I can't swear to it because I haven't seen the inner workings of Essex's figures, is that they may well have already counted in NHS FNC. So what that's resulting in is a negative feedback, where in fact it's quite likely, quite plausible, that it is in fact a positive one. So this is something, it only affects a minority of local authorities, and probably just a small minority. And I've chosen this particular example just to demonstrate it, but it's something that one has to be aware of, very much aware of. So now I just want to, having shown the headline results, I just want to look at the parameters tab here, just to see where the evidence comes from. So if we go to the parameters tab, what I want to do first of all is to go down to, let's say, if we arrive with the top of the screen at row 33. And what that has is a list of benchmark staff input rates. And these are measured in terms of hours of staff per resident per week. And the source of this is data from organizations, care home groups, which have provided information to us in 24-25 and going back for quite a long time. Now, the interesting thing about the numbers of hours per resident per week is that they don't change much over time, despite the known fact that the resident profile is becoming more dependent, more owned. The rates of input of staff, on average, do not change very much. So this is actually an absolute basic and fundamental number that has to go into a model which is built up from each individual driver of cost. If we don't go downwards, I'm not going to ask Tim to go down one by one, but you'll find down below the other element of staff costs, which is pay rates. And we know that they are driven primarily by national living wage, and there has been this phenomenon of compression of pay rates just above national living wage, and we're using the latest data to confirm this. After that, after the pay rates, we then go into the other non-pay costs, etc., etc. So there's a whole list of parameters that go into this, and all of these are sort of, you can view as factory set parameters, which are all evidence-based, but can, because the model has to be flexible at the end of the day, they can be edited, changed, in order to see the impact that any change in parameter might have. So one of the changes in parameters you might want to make is that this year, in the view of the evidence on increased interest rates, we've increased the assumed rate of return on investment in the accommodation from 6% to 7%. What this reflects is a sort of interest rate that a long-term leaseholder of a care home might have to pay for a long-term lease. So that's been increased. It may be that providers, or in fact commissioners, would wish to amend, alter this parameter. They can do so if they wish to. So that's the parameters very briefly, just to emphasize that they're all very much evidence-based. If I can then just go into an example of, let's say, nursing care again, the nursing 65, 24, 25, just to go further down to see some more of the detail that is provided within the model. So you've seen the headline, which shows how the overall rate being paid by local authorities compares with what we believe to be reasonable median average costs. But then if you go below that, and I'd just like you, Tim, if you can, just to go gradually down there, and we see that the costs are divided up into segments, into care costs, accommodation costs, ancillary costs, operators' profit in total, and then the columns are divided up into staffing, into other costs, etc., etc. So it's all, as it has been for a couple of decades now, very carefully constructed in order to take account of every single cost driver that exists within care homes for older people, and to demonstrate that in detailed outcomes in the orange tab. So I think I'll come to an end there, and look forward to whatever questions there are.
Great. Thank you so much, William, for taking us through that. Apologies to everyone in the call. I do have some direct drilling which is taking place behind me. So if you do hear some noise on my end, I'm afraid that's what it is, and we'll mute as appropriate. So just to let you know, there is now, obviously, this is the opportunity for yourself to ask any questions that you might have. Please do drop them in the Q&A function on the chat if you have any. But I think if while you're thinking, I perhaps take the lead and just begin to kick stuff off. And Fraser, I think possibly is sort of a good opportunity to kind of bring you in here would be to perhaps ask, well, first of all, please do give an opportunity to introduce yourself, but also perhaps ask, we've obviously seen the tool and it looks great, but what is the kind of practical kind of use case for it from what you're hearing, what you're seeing at kind of Care England? How can this kind of evidence-based data be used to improve, the outcomes for, the fee negotiations, perhaps both from the care provider side and the commissioner side, if it's possible to see it from both sides?
Absolutely. Thank you, Tim. And yeah, just to introduce myself, my name is Fraser Ricketson. I'm the policy manager at Care England. So I oversee all the policy work that we do. However, I have a specific lead on the funding area. So I cover local authority and ICB public funding. And essentially, that's why I'm here today, to kind of talk about the importance of evidence. And for me, it comes down to a really simple point, really, that it helps create a foundation of transparency and mutual understanding when it comes to fee negotiations. So for care providers, it offers a way to clearly demonstrate the financial pressures that they face, including the cost of meeting rising care demands, recruiting and retaining staff, and complying with regulations. I think, especially in 25-26, when we've had all the budget changes with the national insurance contribution, with the threshold being lowered, but then also the rise in the contributions, that's a very complicated thing for people who aren't financially minded. So it's important that we can translate what those costs are for the adult social care sector when it is a workforce dominated cost sector. So this level of detail enables providers to make a strong case for fair funding. And on the other side of the table for commissioners, evidence-based data helps offer a detailed view of what it truly takes to deliver quality care, and it helps them allocate resources effectively, but also justify the cost basis to the rest of the council when they have to approve it in their cabinet meetings. So by grounding the negotiations in data, both sides can move away from a subjective discussion and work towards a shared approach which fosters trust and helps achieve better outcomes for the entire care ecosystem, but those who are using care.
Great stuff. No, thank you, guys. That's incredibly helpful. We've got some questions coming in now. I will definitely come back to the top question probably last, but perhaps as we stay in the kind of the granular for the moment. Perhaps this one's probably, William, just a kind of clarification on what the tool can be used for. Someone in the chat is asking, can the toolkit be used to calculate costs for other services, such as, for instance, community-based services, or is it really at present purely a tool for kind of residential and nursing only?
Right, or a tool for older people. The reason why it's for older people is that one can view the costs as the concept of an average cost is reasonable and sensible as a basis for negotiation. In the case of younger adults, it's much less so because the fees are so variable and because the level of staffing input is so variable as well. However, having said that, yes, it is perfectly possible to use it because as long as you can introduce an agreed number against the staffing hours per resident per week, which could be anything from 20 to 150, then absolutely, yes, the model is perfectly capable of giving sensible results for younger adults as well.
Right, now that's that is sort of very, very helpful. And I think sort of keeping it on the granular for a moment before I come back to you, Fraser. So another question in the chat is, I think we can know the answer, but it'd be good if you can explain perhaps why this is the case. Does the toolkit provide a range of appropriate fees, or does it always provide an exact figure? And I think perhaps kind of reflecting perhaps on the concept of an appropriate fee and perhaps why it doesn't in this situation.
Right. In the best of all possible worlds, it would provide a range of fees, and that range would be determined by some objective measure of dependency and necessary inputs. It doesn't, because there is no such tool which exists which is able to classify individuals according to the level of dependency and the costs that they incur. But I still think that it is useful because most local authorities will still think in terms of an average market rate, and this is what the toolkit is attempting to do. It's attempting to provide an average market rate around which there can be variations.
Yeah, it's almost in some ways, it may not be the end of the discussion, but it kind of is it enables care providers to begin the discussions from a kind of a solid base, and that perhaps actually feeds into the question I'll pose over to yourself, Fraser, and William, do feel free to come in as well if you have any views on this, which is somebody in the chat asking, and it may seem a simple question, but let's dig into it. Why is it actually essential to use consistent and reliable data in discussions about care funding?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, William, do you want to go first?
No, please carry on, Fraser.
So when the data is accurate and consistent, it eliminates the risk of misunderstandings or conflicting interpretations, and it allows the conversation to focus on addressing the real issues. As you said, Tim, there, usually it will be at the beginning of the conversation and then it can continue from that data. And that's what's important. Without that data, there is no starting point. There is debating on every single individual cost line. As soon as there is something that is consistent and reliable, so there's a common understanding between commissioners and care providers, it means that they can work together more collaboratively, more effectively, and hopefully also speed up the process as well. We see a lot of the time at Care England when we're lobbying for care providers and challenging local authorities on their fee uplifts, there are often delays in fee uplift announcements and then the final agreement coming into place because there is a clouded guide. There is no clear cut through of data to actually understand this is what it costs to provide high quality care. This is the level of funding that we need. And then that makes it so much easier to have those conversations. So it speeds up the process entirely, and it also adds credibility to all the funding decisions that are being made, and it strengthens the case for adequate support and gives confidence that the needs are understood. So, William, I'll also pass over to you because I'm sure that you have more intel you can add to this.
Right. Well, I mean, it's just a basic assumption that I'm making all the time that data is valuable, and accurate data, and reliable data is even more valuable.
Yeah. And I think if I just add one final point for me, because I think it will lead into the next question actually, which is part of what this does is address the asymmetry of the level of knowledge and information held by the care provider and by the local authority or the commission. The commissioner has at its disposal the kind of the budget of a local authority and the data which sits behind it, the local authority and the people power. And often if you are a small care home, you are like potentially, you're not walking into the meeting with the same, potentially with the same level of like background evidence at your disposal. So one of the purposes of what this kind of toolkit can do is help smaller providers with a kind of established evidence base, which has been in place for a number of years, so that, as Fraser says, you're coming into this conversation with something you can talk about and discuss. And if a council presents a range of figures, then you are also able to present a range of evidence-based figures as well. So it kind of helps level, it will help level the playing field to a certain extent. But I think that then kind of, I wanted to make that point, because I think it ties nicely into the next question, which is, William, Fraser, both of your views I think will be valuable on this, is how accepted is the model in the inputs with kind of local authorities or with commissioning bodies? And they've given some examples here, like what level, for instance, percentage of profit is deemed acceptable. And then there's a more technical one as well about, does the model include finance costs and CapEx costs as part of that? So, William, perhaps if you go to this first, and then Fraser, if you've got any other views, then please do feel free to add.
Right. So it's essentially a question about the reasonableness of certain parameters.
Yes, and also I guess to an extent how much you feel that they're, you know, how accepted have you found it to be with local authorities, and perhaps obviously reflecting on the fair cost of care exercises we've done also might be useful there.
Okay. Well, first of all, we don't deal entirely with providers, although providers are our main client group, I suppose, when it comes to care cost benchmarks and the work that we've been commissioned to do by both local authorities and both local authorities together with providers. We've been commissioned to do that as well. And what we find is that provided the local authority is genuinely willing to look at what the costs are, there can be a degree of there is a common approach to it, I think, and it is possible for an objective solution to be found. I have to say, though, that there are some commissioners, I guess, who take a view which we wouldn't agree on the reasonable profit and return on capital costs. I mean, the benchmark that's written into the Care Cost Benchmarks model is 6%, sorry, now 7% return on capital for accommodation. And we think that's reasonable because if you look at what a new wholly sale and leaseback funded care home provider, or the provider of a brand new 100% financed from a property company provider would have to pay to that source of finance, it would, for those with the very best covenant, it might be down to about 5.5%, but it's more likely to be 7%. So that's the basis for the benchmark for a return on capital, and we think it's a very reasonable one and well discussed and evidenced. But we find that some commissioners will not agree with that, and they will take a view that perhaps 3% is sufficient. We would simply disagree with that, and we just look at the evidence and a rational discussion around that to come to some sort of reasonable common view on it. The other one that's built into it is a 10% return or 10% margin on operating costs, which we think is reasonable because, after all, providers are commercial companies mainly, and they're not altruistic, and they have to make a profit. And the 10% happens to be the same sort of level that a home care operator, for example, would aim to make on home care costs. And when you strip the accommodation out of it, there's no real reason why a return on operating costs should be any different in care homes and in home care. So we believe that 10% is a reasonable figure. But then again, we'll get pushback from some commissioners with the view that it should be much lower than that. And this we found, in fact, in the work we did on the 2022 exercise, Fair Cost of Care, in which there were sort of a number of commissioners arguing for much lower benchmark figures. But I think we were able to come to a conclusion in most cases in which the model's view of 6%, 6 or 7% return on capital and 10% margin on operating costs was viewed as reasonable.
Thanks, William. Fraser, I just want to hand it over to you briefly, because obviously you see it from a kind of slightly different perspective, obviously both for national and also hearing individual local conversations. Quite routinely, I imagine, commissioning negotiations is part of what comes up to your ears. So whether it's a reflection on these specific figures or reflections more broadly on, that challenge of making, agreeing between the provider and the commissioner over these kind of points.
I think when it comes to commissioning, there's two sides to that coin, which is the funds for now and the funds for the future. And most of the time, a lot just due to the fact that local authorities, they've had their budgets cut by 40%. There's no national infrastructure for a long-term funding settlement for adult social care. They've got a really tough job. But however, commissioning can't just focus on making sure every provider just is able to stand still. Providers need to invest in their services. They need to be able to renovate. They need to be able to refurbish, train their staff further. They need to modernize and adopt new technologies and everything else. And all of that has a cost to it, especially when you look at more into the future, like 2020, 2035 and 2040, when we've got environmental sustainability and governance policies that providers need to meet for local authority contracts. They need to invest in themselves to be able to meet those policies appropriately. So that is where profitability comes into that, because that is extra resources that they can reinvest into themselves without having to meet all of the essentials of providing care. So it's a really important figure to understand and having these conversations now. So it is about bringing that immediate term and long-term funding into the commissioning procedure. And from where we've been working with care providers and local authorities, there is an understanding of that. There is an understanding that they can't just keep having this short-termism funding papering over the cracks. There needs to have that investment, and the data really helps evidence that. We've talked about the fair cost of care within this care cost benchmark tools. It shows the averages and it shows the gap between the two, and it allows providers and local authorities to come together and build a strategy to bridge that gap. And where there are instances where it may be more challenging than others, that's where we can come in and help push people into the right direction. But it's about having those informed decisions with the accurate, reliable data to present those arguments.
But no, that's super helpful. So conscious of time, so I'm going to roll two questions into one here, both for you, William. The first is somebody's asked, how do providers get access to the toolkit? And secondly, I'll wrap the same one in, how much does the toolkit cost? Both very important questions, I feel. Oh, William, have we...
I'm sorry, Tim, I don't know whether you can hear me, but you cut a lot there.
Okay, so wait, just to check, William, are you back with us? Possibly.
I can half hear you.
Okay, so don't worry, William. I'll answer the question myself. So the
some technical.
So anyone on the call who does want to access this toolkit, you'll be able to go to LaingBuisson.com and you'll be able to access the tool from there. It's on our website, available to purchase, or if you have a sort of if you already have an account manager, please do get in touch with one of our account managers. On the question of how much it costs, I will come back to you, because I wasn't expecting William to drop off at that point, unfortunately. But
Tim, I can hear you again now.
oh yeah, okay, William. So we've got William back. So I was just telling everyone in chat how they can access the toolkit, which is via the LaingBuisson.com website, or if they have an account manager, then please do sort of reach out to them directly. If you know LaingBuisson through our social media channels, you can always reach out through LinkedIn. The question I was going to put to you, William, as well, because I didn't have it to hand, was how much does the toolkit cost? Someone has asked in the chat.
I'm afraid you've got me there. It's something over £1,000 for a year subscription.
Okay, what we will do is, as we can absolutely kind of sort of make that available, I will bring it up in the background. So as we're sort of rounding things off, and I'm conscious of everyone's time, I'm going to kind of ask Fraser perhaps a broader question related to the Care Cost Benchmark. But obviously, there's been a lot of announcements around social care, some which I think we've expected and maybe would have liked a different kind of view on, but we are getting a new independent review. But there's also, of course, all the announcements and thinking about the social care workforce. And like one of the things that this does very clearly is really re-emphasize and demonstrate how much of a care provider's costs are baked into kind of a workforce, and of course staff who are often impacted by national living wage increases in particular. So do you have any kind of sort of, I guess, sort of reflections that you'd like to sort of make people call about the kind of these recent announcements and kind of where I guess Care England is kind of perhaps currently sitting in relation to kind of this kind of workforce change debate? What would you guys most be liking to see as part of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think with the Fair Pay Agreement, absolutely, it's a really ambitious but a really great idea. However, it needs to be fully funded. The sector cannot afford even meeting the real living wage, let alone a fair pay agreement, whatever that consultation comes to when the process is built and providers are involved in the process and everything else, just because of the way the funding mechanisms currently work for local authorities who fund the majority of care across England. And having the data to show the extent of the workforce costs is really critical for these conversations, because the care provider representation isn't the only representation as part of the Fair Pay Agreement. There's a number of different cogs in the machine, and not all of the parties involved may fully be aware of the extent of the costs. And while every care provider wants and fully agrees that care workers need to be paid the proper and appropriate amount for the work that they do, because of how valuable they are, you know, social care cannot be done without them. They deserve to be awarded properly for the work that they do. It's making sure that national government, local government understand that, okay, we want to be part of this process, but this is how much it actually costs for us. Let's work together to make sure that this can come true, and that whatever is agreed as the fair pay can be implemented within the adult social care sector. It's the first of its kind, this Fair Pay Agreement. We haven't had it in England before. New Zealand have done it, and other countries have also done it. However, this is the first time for the UK, and the sector is pioneering for everyone else. If we get it right, everyone everywhere will also get to do it. But it's important that we get it right. And to get it right, we have to have that data. And coming on to the commission by Baroness Casey that you refer to as well, it's one of those things that they will be gathering data and everything else. And it's 2028 is when the outcome of this commission is meant to be announced, and like the final review of what is needed for the adult social care reform. And whilst many of us here today will know what is already needed, again, it's that data. So we've been making the same calls, making the same arguments of what needs to change for a number of years now. This data, having consistent, reliable data and up-to-date data, make sure that those aren't being lost, saying, okay, so we've said that there's been underfunding for a while now. We can now evidence the extent of the underfunding. As the years go by, we can say this is how much it's changed, and we can always provide an up-to-date reflective cost of saying, well, actually, this is how much is needed. This is how much is needed. So you make sure that although it is in 2028, and there's a lot of split opinion on that, and I'll share that another time on Care England's full position on it, it's important that we have those up-to-date figures so that it isn't just lost. We can build up that long-term underfunding picture and get the reform that we actually need there.
Right, no, that's super helpful, and I think plenty of really important points there. First of all, obviously important to get it right, and secondly, I think like remembering that other countries have done this kind of thing and put these things in place. Like it will, perhaps sometimes when you look at these kind of changes, they look like a really big change, and how on earth are we going to get through it? But also remembering that there are other countries out there which have moved through these kind of models and that it is possible. So I really appreciate your reflections there. I'm very conscious of time. I don't want to hold anyone longer than we said we would, but I think we can probably, because I think it's an important one, squeeze one last question in. William, if you are back and your audio is with us, which is about whether the toolkit contains any scope for efficiencies. So can a provider use it in a way of perhaps looking at their own costs in relation to others and seeing whether this is and using it as a way to make efficiencies, not just purely as a negotiation tool. So brief reflections on that before I think we probably have to wrap things up for today.
Right. I think all the parameters with them are well evidence-based and reasonable parameters. Having said that, there is always the possibility of making efficiency savings. And one can even make its efficiency savings on staffing if you do it sensibly. And the reality is, and we know this from the Fair Price for Care exercise in 2022, is that where resources are more challenged in the North and Midlands of England, all costs per resident are lower, including staffing costs. So one of the responses of organisations for providers to fewer resources is slightly lower staff input and everything else. So it is possible, but there are dangers.
Fantastic. Last wise words from William there. We are just reaching the 10:45, which is when I believe we said we would wrap things up. So I really just want to thank everyone who joined us today. In the background, I did check the price of the toolkit. It is it's 1475 for an annual subscription for the year. So if that is interest, please do reach out to us, and we will be able to get you up and running as soon as possible. But no, thank you for joining today. Just want to thank Fraser Ricketson, who has joined us from Care England. Thank you for your insights. It's been super helpful to just get that perspective from someone who is, hearing across the country at both the national and the local level. And William, thank you for walking us through the toolkit and showing the purposes of what it can do. And I think with that, thank you everyone for joining. The slides will be available for download, as will be recording. And we hope you have taken something useful and interesting from the session. So thank you so much for joining.